3 weeks had passed since Jake first arrived at the academy, and his reputation had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. Students from other squads would stop him in the hallways to ask questions about Earth. Instructors watched his every move during exercises. Some aliens seemed fascinated by him, while others appeared nervous when he was around. "You have become the most studied student in Academy history," Vexstar told him one morning as they prepared for another training session. "Dr. Kess has written 4 research papers about your physiology already. What did she find out?" Jake asked, pulling on his boots. "That your species should not exist," Scylla said, her crystal body flickering with what Jake had learned meant confusion. "According to galactic biological standards, humans are impossible." "Impossible how?" "Your muscle density is too high." "For your bone structure," Lyra explained, floating near her bed. "Your cardiovascular system is too efficient for your body size. Your nervous system processes information faster than it should be able to. Your immune system fights off diseases that should kill you. Plus your temperature regulation, pain tolerance, and healing rate are all beyond normal ranges," Grox added, checking his equipment. "Dr. Kess says humans are like someone took the best traits from dozens of species and combined them into one body." Jake frowned. "That doesn't sound right. Humans get sick all the time. We get hurt. We die from all kinds of things." "Yes, but you also survive things that would instantly kill most other species," Vexstar said. "Your death rate from environmental hazards is incredibly low compared to other biological life forms." "Maybe we're just lucky," Jake suggested. "Luck does not explain evolution," Scylla said. "Your species evolved these traits for a reason. Your planet must have been extremely dangerous to require such adaptations." That day's exercise was different from the others. Instead of Squad 7 working together, Jake was assigned to work with Squad 3 on a special mission. Squad 3 was known as one of the best teams in the Academy, led by a Valkyrian warrior named Rexan, who had never failed a simulation. "So you are the famous human," Rexan said when Jake joined his squad. Rexan was tall and thin with pale blue skin and silver eyes. His equipment was the most advanced Jake had seen at the Academy. "I have heard interesting stories about your methods. I just do what works," Jake replied. "We shall see," Rexan said. "Today we faced a nightmare scenario. It is the Academy's most challenging urban warfare simulation. Only 3 squads have ever completed successfully. The other members of Squad 3 introduced themselves. There was Kala, a short but powerful Dexian with skin like stone. Zeph, a tall crystalline whose body glowed with internal light. And Nira, a graceful Aquarian whose gills fluttered as she breathed the artificial atmosphere. "What makes this scenario so difficult?" Jake asked as they prepared their equipment. "Multiple objectives, limited time, and adaptive enemies," Kala explained. "The holographic opponents learn from your tactics and change their behavior accordingly. Plus environmental hazards that increase as the simulation progresses," Zeph added. "Equipment failure, structural collapse, toxic gas releases." "And they?" "Extraction point changes location every 20 minutes, Nira said. "You must constantly adapt your strategy." Jake nodded, checking his basic gear. Compared to Squad 3's advanced equipment, he looked like he was preparing for a camping trip rather than a military exercise. "Are you certain you do not want additional protection?" Rexan asked. "This simulation has injured students even with full safety protocols active." "I'm good with what I have," Jake said. "Your confidence is either admirable or foolish," Rexan replied. "We will discover which shortly." The simulation chamber transformed into a war-torn city with multiple levels of buildings, underground tunnels, and rooftop access. Smoke and debris filled the air. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the streets. "Mission begins in 30 seconds, Commander Vex announced. "Your first objective is to secure the communications center in the North Building." Secondary objectives will be revealed as you progress. Jake studied the layout quickly. The north building was heavily defended, with multiple approach routes, but all of them exposed to enemy fire. Standard approach, Rexon said, activating his tactical display. Kala takes point with her armor. Zeph provides covering fire. Nira handles electronic warfare. I coordinate from the center. Human, you follow Kala and provide support fire. Actually, Jake said, I have a different idea. This is not the time for experimental tactics, Rexan said firmly. We use proven methods. Begin simulation, Commander Dex announced. Holographic. Enemies immediately appeared in windows and on rooftops. Squad 3 moved forward in perfect formation, their equipment working together seamlessly. Jake followed for a few steps, then broke away and headed for a damaged section of building wall. Where are you going? Rexon demanded over the communication system. Trust me, Jake called back, climbing through a hole in the wall. Squad 3 continued their careful advance while Jake made his way through the interior of the building. His lighter equipment allowed him to move quickly through rubble and debris that would have slowed down heavier gear. He emerged on the second floor of the north building, behind the enemy positions. The holographic defenders were focused on Squad 3's frontal assault and didn't notice Jake until he started eliminating them from behind. Objective secured, Jake reported, standing in the communication center. How did you get there so fast? Kala asked, amazement clear in her voice. I took a shortcut, Jake said. There was no shortcut on the tactical map, Zeph protested. There is now, Jake replied. The second objective appeared. Rescue hostages from the underground parking garage. Squad 3 regrouped and began planning their approach to the lower levels. The tunnels are heavily defended, Rexan said, studying his sensors. We need to clear each section carefully. Or we could cause a distraction, Jake suggested, looking at the building structure. What kind of distraction? Nira asked Jake, pointing to a support column that looked damaged. If that falls, it will block the main tunnel entrance. The enemies will have to come out to clear it, and we can ambush them. That could cause a total structural collapse, Rexan said. The risk is too high. Sometimes you have to take risks, Jake said. Before anyone could stop him, Jake planted an explosive charge on the support column and took cover. The explosion brought down part of the ceiling, blocking the tunnel as predicted. The holographic enemies poured out of the secondary exits, directly into Squad 3's prepared ambush. The hostages were rescued within minutes. That was extremely dangerous, Rexan said, as they moved to the next objective. But it worked, Jake pointed out. It worked this time. What if you had been wrong about the structural integrity? Then, we would have found another way, Jake said simply. The final objective was the most challenging. Disable a weapon system on the roof of the tallest building while under heavy fire from aerial enemies. Squad 3's equipment included grappling systems and flight assists, but the building was over 40 stories tall. This will take at least 20 minutes to climb safely, Rexon calculated. Jake looked at the building and saw something different. The exterior was covered with maintenance ladders, window ledges, and architectural details that could serve as handholds. I can be there in 5 minutes, Jake said. Impossible, Zeph said. The exterior route is too dangerous. Maybe for you, Jake said, already moving toward the building. Wait, Rexon called. Your equipment does not have safety systems. If you fall, I won't fall, Jake called back, beginning his climb. Squad 3 watched in amazement as Jake scaled the building like it was a jungle gym. He used every handhold and foothold available, moving with a speed and confidence that seemed impossible without mechanical assistance. Halfway up, the aerial enemies spotted him and began firing. Jake used the building's structure for cover, timing his movements to avoid the energy blasts. His approach vector is unpredictable, Nero reported, monitoring the enemy fire patterns. Their targeting systems cannot get a lock on him because he is not following any logical climbing pattern, Kala observed. He is adapting his route constantly based on available cover and enemy positions. Jake reached the roof and disabled the weapon system just as his oxygen began running thin from the climb. Squad 3 arrived via their mechanical climbing systems, just in time to see him plant the final explosive charge. "Mission completed," Commander Dex announced. "Total time, 18 minutes, 37 seconds. New Academy record." As they left the simulation chamber, Rexon approached Jake with an expression of bewilderment. "I have led 43 successful missions using proven tactics and advanced equipment," he said. "You ignored every safety protocol, used minimal gear, and took risks that should have gotten you killed. Yet you outperformed my entire squad." "Different approaches work for different people," Jake said. "No," Rexon said. "This is something else entirely. Your species does not think about danger the same way we do." "What do you mean?" "We calculate risks and minimize them with technology and careful planning. You assess risks and accept them. As part of the solution, you turn danger into a tool." Jake had never thought about it that way, but Rexon might be right. Jake woke up on the third day of the endurance trial feeling different. His body had stopped shivering sometime during the night. The terrible cold that had made him miserable for 2 days was still there, but it felt manageable now. His hands worked properly. His thoughts were clear. He could move without the stiffness that had plagued him before. His squad mates were not doing as well. Vexstar S heating patches were running low on power. Silanef S crystal body had become dull and cloudy from the cold. Grox's thermal regulators were working overtime, making loud humming sounds. Lyra's floating devices were barely maintaining their heat bubbles. "How do you feel?" Vextar asked, his voice weak. "Better," Jake said honestly. "Much better." "That makes no sense," Silanef sighed. "You should be getting worse, not better." "Maybe I'm just getting used to it," Jake suggested. "No one gets used to this," Grox said, his environmental systems beeping warnings. "About power levels." Jake spent the morning finding food while his squad mates conserved their energy. He discovered edible plants under the snow and caught small animals using traps he built from materials in their shelter. His squad mates watched in amazement as he worked efficiently in conditions that were draining their life support systems. "Where did you learn to do that?" Lyra asked, pointing to the fish Jake had caught through a hole in the ice. "Boy Scouts," Jake said, cleaning the fish with his knife. "And marine survival training." "Your species teaches survival skills to children?" Vexstar asked. "Some of us. It's considered fun." "Fun?" Silaneth's crystal body flashed with confusion. "Learning to survive in deadly conditions is recreational for your species?" "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds weird," Jake admitted. When the extraction team arrived at the end of 72 hours, they found Jake in better condition than when he had started. His squad mates were exhausted, their equipment nearly dead, but Jake was moving around the camp doing maintenance work. "Impossible," muttered Dr. Kess, the Academy's chief medical officer. She was a tall, thin alien with gray skin and large black eyes. "Completely impossible." "What's impossible?" Jake asked. "You have not only survived 3 days in Arctic conditions with minimal equipment, you have actually adapted to them. Your body temperature is normal. Your energy levels are stable. According to these readings, you could continue for several more days without difficulty. Is that bad?" "It is unprecedented," Dr. Kess said, making notes on her tablet. "I would like to study your physiology more closely." "Study it how?" "Blood samples, tissue analysis, metabolic testing. Nothing harmful, but we need to understand what makes your species so resilient." Jake looked at his squad mates, who were being helped by medical technicians. "Will it help them understand humans better?" "It might help everyone understand humans better," Dr. Kess replied. "Okay," Jake said. "But can we do it after I get warm food and a hot shower?" Back at the academy, Jake's performance in the endurance trial became the talk of every conversation. Students who had barely noticed him before now watched his every move. Instructors discussed his results in hushed tones. The Academy's computer systems were updated with new data about human capabilities. "You are becoming a legend," Vextar said as they prepared for their next class. "Students are calling you the Death Worlder." "I don't like that name," Jake said. "It is not meant as an insult," Silonith explained. "It is a term of respect. In galactic military culture, warriors from Death Worlds are considered elite soldiers." "But I'm not elite," Jake protested. "I'm just a regular Marine." "A regular Marine from a Death World," Lyra said. "That makes you elite by default." Their next class was combat simulations, taught by Commander Dex, a veteran warrior from the Altarian Republic. Commander Dex had fought in 3 galactic wars and was known for his tough training methods. "Today we begin close combat training," Commander Dex announced. He was a large alien with 4 arms and skin that looked like metal scales. "You will face holographic enemies in various combat scenarios. The goal is to learn tactical thinking and adaptive combat techniques." Jake's squad was assigned to Urban Warfare, Scenario 7. The simulation chamber transformed into a destroyed city with rubble-filled streets and damaged buildings. The air was thick with smoke and dust. "Your mission is to reach the extraction point while dealing with enemy forces," Commander Dex explained. "You will face opponents with superior numbers and firepower. You must use tactics, not just technology." To succeed, Jake's squad mates activated their combat systems. Vextar Air's armor plates shifted to provide better protection. Siloneth's energy shields glowed brighter. Grox's weapon systems came online with electronic beeps. Lyra's floating. Devices spread out to provide tactical support. Jake checked his basic rifle and sidearm. His equipment was standard military issue, nothing special or advanced. "Are you ready?" Commander Dex asked. "Ready, sir," Jake replied. "Begin simulation." Holographic enemies immediately appeared at the end of the street. They were armed with energy weapons and covered behind destroyed vehicles. Jake's squad mates took defensive positions and began returning fire. Jake did something different. Instead of staying with the group, he moved to the side, using the rubble and smoke for cover. He had learned in the Marines that sometimes the best tactic was to be unpredictable. "Where are you going?" Vextar called out. "Flanking maneuver," Jake called back, disappearing into the ruins of a building. His squad mates continued their firefight with the holographic enemies while Jake worked his way around to the side. His basic equipment was lighter than their advanced systems, allowing him to move quietly through the debris. The holographic enemies were focused on the main group, not watching for threats from other directions. Jake positioned himself behind their cover and opened fire. The surprised enemies were eliminated quickly. "How did you get behind them?" Siloneth asked when they regrouped. "I went around," Jake said simply. But the tactical analysis showed that route was too dangerous, Lyra said, checking her floating devices. "My sensors indicated multiple hazards." "Sometimes you have to ignore the sensors and trust your instincts," Jake replied. They continued through the simulation, facing more complex scenarios. Each time, Jake's approach was different from his squad mates, where they relied on their advanced equipment and tactical computers. Jake used basic infantry tactics and situational awareness in one scenario. They had to cross a bridge defended by enemy snipers. Jake's squad mates began analyzing the enemy positions and calculating the best approach using their technological advantages. Jake looked at the situation and saw something else. The bridge supports were damaged, but still climbable. While his squad mates planned their frontal assault, Jake climbed under the bridge and emerged behind the enemy positions. "That was not the intended solution," Commander Dex said after the simulation ended. "Did it work?" Jake asked. "Yes, but it was extremely risky. Your equipment does not have the protection systems that would normally be required for such a maneuver." "But it worked," Jake repeated. "Yes," Commander Dex admitted. "It worked." In the final scenario, Jake's squad faced overwhelming odds. 20 holographic enemies surrounded them in a courtyard with no apparent escape route. The simulation was designed to test how well they could work together under pressure. Jake's squad mates formed a defensive circle and began coordinating their advanced weapon systems. Their computers calculated firing solutions and target priorities. It was textbook military tactics. Jake saw the situation differently. The enemies were holographic, which meant they followed programmed behavior patterns. Real enemies would be more unpredictable, but these would react according to their programming. He dropped his rifle and pulled out a smoke grenade. Before his squad mates could ask what he was doing, he threw it into the center of the courtyard and charged straight at the enemy line. The holographic enemies reacted exactly as Jake had predicted. They focused their fire on the visible threat, allowing his squad mates to eliminate them from behind the smokescreen. "Explain your reasoning," Commander Dex said after the simulation ended. "They were holograms," Jake said. "They had to follow their programming. I gave them a target they couldn't ignore." "And if they had been real enemies?" "Real enemies would have been more careful, but they also would have made mistakes. Programming doesn't make mistakes, but it also doesn't adapt very well." Commander Vex was quiet for a long moment. "Your tactical thinking is unlike anything I have seen before. You ignore conventional wisdom and trust your instincts. Is that bad?" "It is dangerous," Commander Vex replied. "But it is also effective. Your approach worked in every scenario." After class, Jake's squad mates bombarded him with questions about his tactics. "How did you know the holograms would react that way?" Vexstar asked. "I didn't know for sure," Jake admitted. "But I made an educated guess based on how computer programs usually work." "That is not how military tactics are supposed to work," Sylvaneth said. "You are supposed to analyze the situation and choose the safest approach." "Sometimes the safest approach is the most dangerous one," Jake said. "If everyone expects you to do one thing, doing something else can give you an advantage. Your species has very strange ideas about safety," Lyra observed. "Maybe," Jake said, "but they seem to work." Word spread through the academy faster than Jake had expected. By the time he and his squad returned to their barracks, other students were already gathering in the hallways to stare at him. Some whispered to each other in languages he didn't understand. Others just watched him with wide eyes as he walked past. "You are famous now," Vexstar said as they entered their room. "The human who survived the volcanic hellscape without protection." "I don't want to be famous," Jake replied, sitting on his bed. "I just want to learn and do my job." "Your job is now being the most interesting student in the academy," Sylvaneth said, her crystal body still dim from their earlier exercise. "3 different instructors have asked to study your performance recordings." "Study them for what?" "To understand how you did what you did," Lyra answered. Her floating devices were still making soft beeping sounds as they analyzed her condition after the simulation. "My people have computers that can calculate survival odds for any environment. According to them, you should have died within 5 minutes of entering that simulation." Jake lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. "Maybe your computers are wrong." "Our computers are never wrong," Grok said, removing his environmental suit piece by piece. "They have data from thousands of species across the galaxy. They know exactly what conditions each species can survive." "Well, they don't know about humans yet," Jake said. "That is the problem," Vexstar said. "No one knows about humans. Your species is new to the galactic community. Most of what we know comes from secondhand reports and scientific studies done from a distance." "What do the reports say?" Jake asked. "That your species is dangerous," Sylvaneth said quietly. "That you come from a world so hostile that it should not be able to support complex life. That you have survived and thrived in conditions that would destroy most civilizations." "But we're not dangerous," Jake protested. "We're just people trying to get by." "A species that can survive in a volcanic hellscape without protection is dangerous by definition," Lyra said. "Even if they do not mean to be." The next few days past in a blur of classes and training exercises. Jake found himself paired with different students for each activity, as if the instructors were trying to understand how he worked with various species. He did well in most exercises, but nothing as dramatic as his first simulation. Still, the whispers followed him everywhere. Students would stop talking when he approached and start again when he left. He caught fragments of conversation in languages he was learning to recognize. Words like impossible and death world and dangerous came up a lot. On the fourth day, Instructor Koref gathered Squad 7 for a special announcement. "You have been selected for the endurance trials," he said, his wooden voice carrying a tone Jake had learned to recognize as serious. "This is a 72-hour survival exercise in simulated Arctic conditions. You will be dropped in a frozen wasteland and must survive until extraction." Jake's squad mates exchanged glances. They had been hoping for more standard combat training. "The temperature will drop to minus 50 degrees, Koref continued. "The wind will create conditions that feel like minus 80. There will be limited food and water available, but you must find it yourself. Shelter materials are available, but you must build everything from scratch." "What equipment are we allowed?" Vexstar asked. "Basic survival gear only. No powered heating systems, no environmental suits, no emergency beacons. You will have standard cold weather clothing, basic tools, and emergency rations for 12 hours. After that, you are on your own." Jake felt his stomach tighten. 72 hours in Arctic conditions sounded challenging, but not impossible. He had done cold weather training before. "The exercise begins tomorrow at dawn," Koref said. "Prepare your equipment tonight." That evening, Jake's squad mates spent hours preparing their gear. Vexstar had special heating patches that would keep his armor from freezing. Siloneth had energy cells that could generate warmth for her crystal body. Grox had thermal regulators built into his equipment. Lyra had floating devices that could create heat bubbles around her. "What are you taking?" Vexstar asked, watching Jake pack his small bag. "Warm clothes, basic tools, some rope," Jake said, holding up his gear. "Standard cold weather stuff." "That is not enough," Siloneth said, her body flashing with concern. "The cold will kill you within hours." "I've been in cold weather before," Jake said. "I grew up in Minnesota. We get temperatures below zero every winter. This is different," Grox said. "This is Arctic survival. Minus 50 degrees is not the same as a cold winter day. Plus wind that makes it feel like minus 80, Lyra added. "My people cannot survive such conditions, even with our best technology." "I'll be okay," Jake said, though privately he was beginning to worry. Minus 50 did sound extremely cold. "Please," Vexstar said, "take some of my heating patches. They are designed for Cruelian physiology, but they might help." Jake looked at his squad mate's worried face. "Thanks, but I think I need to do this my way." "Your way might get you killed," Siloneth said bluntly. "Maybe," Jake said, "but it might also teach me something about what humans can do." The next morning, they were transported to the simulation chamber. Jake had never seen his squad mates look so heavily equipped. They were wearing so many layers of protective gear that they could barely move. "You look like walking sleeping bags," Jake said, trying to lighten the mood. "We look like survivors," Grox replied. "You look like you are going for a walk in the Paranjishu Park." Jake was wearing thermal underwear, insulated pants, a heavy jacket, boots, gloves, and a winter hat. It was good cold weather gear, but compared to his squad mates, he looked almost naked. "Final equipment check," Koref announced. "Remember, this is a 72-hour exercise. There will be no early extraction, unless you are in immediate danger of death." The simulation chamber activated, and Jake felt the temperature drop immediately. Within minutes, it was colder than any winter day he had ever experienced. The wind cut through his jacket like it was made of paper. Snow began falling, and the ground under his feet became slippery with ice. "Stay together," Vexstar called out, his voice muffled by his protective gear. "We need to find shelter immediately." Jake nodded, already feeling the cold seeping through his clothes. This was going to be much harder than he had expected. They found a spot protected from the worst of the wind and began building a shelter. Jake's hands were already getting numb, but he worked steadily, using techniques he had learned during survival training. His squad mates moved slowly, hampered by their bulky equipment. "How are you still moving?" Lyra asked after an hour of work. Her floating devices were struggling to maintain their heat bubbles in the wind. "I'm cold, but I'm okay," Jake said, though his teeth were starting to chatter. "You should be unconscious by now," Silinev said. "The cold should have shut down your biological functions." "Human biological functions are different," Jake replied. Continuing to work on their shelter dot, by the end of the first day, Jake realized something important. While his squad mates were warmer than he was, they were also much more tired. Their heating systems required energy, and that energy came from their own bodies. They were burning through their reserves trying to stay warm. Jake was cold, but he was also adapting. His body was adjusting to the temperature, finding ways to conserve heat and maintain function. His squad mates were fighting the environment. With technology, Jake was learning to work with it. "This is impossible," Grok said as they settled in for the night. "You should be dead." "I'm not dead," Jake said, wrapping himself in his sleeping bag. "I'm just really, really cold." "How cold?" Vexstar asked. "Cold enough to know I'm alive," Jake replied. His squad mates didn't understand what he meant, but Jake was beginning to understand something about himself and his species. Humans didn't just survive harsh conditions. They adapted to them. They found ways to make the impossible possible. The next 2 days would test that theory to its limits. The next morning came too soon for Jake. A loud buzzing sound filled the barracks at what his watch told him was 5 in the morning. Around him, his squad mates began moving in ways that seemed almost mechanical. Vexstar Air's armor plates shifted and clicked as he sat up. Silenev's crystal body caught the artificial light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. Grox made the floor shake when his huge feet hit the ground. Lyra floated a few inches above her bed, glowing softly in the dim room. "First combat assessment today," Vexstar said, his voice rough from sleep. "I hope you changed your mind about the equipment." Jake stretched and got out of bed, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles from sleeping on a mattress that wasn't quite right for human bodies. "I'm good with what I have," he said, pulling on his uniform. "You are making a mistake," Silenes said, her voice like wind chimes. "The simulation chamber is not forgiven to those who are unprepared." "I've been in plenty of simulations before," Jake replied, lacing up his boots. "How different can it be?" Grox let out a sound that might have been laughter. "Very different, human. Very different." They made their way to the mess hall, where Jake got his first look at alien food. Most of it didn't look like anything he recognized. Some dishes seemed to be moving on their own. Others glowed with strange colors. He found something that looked like oatmeal and tasted like cardboard, but it filled his stomach. "That is Carillion grain paste," Lyra explained, watching him eat. "It is considered a delicacy on 17 worlds." "It's interesting," Jake said, trying to be polite. He had eaten worse things during survival training on Earth. After breakfast, they were directed to the equipment room. Jake watched as his squad mates spent almost an hour preparing their gear. Vexstar added extra armor plates to his already thick skin. Silenev activated energy shields that made the air around her shimmer. Grox put on a suit that made him look like a walking tank. Lyra surrounded herself with floating devices that beeped and hummed. "Last chance," Vexstar said, holding up a piece of armor. "This will at least protect your chest." Jake looked at the armor. It was heavy and bulky, designed for someone with much thicker skin than humans had. "Thanks, but I'll pass." "You are either very brave or very foolish," Silenev said. "Maybe both," Jake admitted. They were led to a large chamber with smooth metal walls. In the center was a raised platform where Instructor Korov waited along with several other teachers Jake hadn't met yet. Students from other squads were already there, all of them covered in protective gear that made them look like they were preparing for a war. "Welcome to your first combat assessment," Korov announced. His wooden voice echoed in the large room. "Today you will face the volcanic hellscape. Simulation. This environment recreates the conditions found on Kralik 7, a world where the air itself can kill most species." Jake felt his stomach drop. A volcanic world didn't sound pleasant. The temperature will reach 200 degrees in some areas. The atmosphere contains toxic gases. The gravity is twice what most of you are used to. Sharp rocks and unstable ground will test your mobility. You must reach the extraction point within 2 hours or face automatic failure. Korov's eyes swept across the assembled students. Those who are not properly equipped should reconsider participating. This simulation has caused injuries even to well-protected students. Jake felt dozens of alien eyes looking at him. He was the only one not wearing heavy protective gear. His uniform felt thin compared to the armored suits around him. "Is everyone ready?" Korov asked. Jake raised his hand. "I'm ready, sir." "Human Morrison," Korov said, "are you certain you wish to proceed without additional protection?" "Yes, sir." "Very well. Enter the simulation chamber." The room around them began to change. The walls became rough stone. The air grew thick and hot. Jake felt sweat start to form on his forehead as the temperature climbed. The gravity increased, making his gear feel heavier. Steam rose from cracks in the ground, and the smell of sulfur filled the air. "Begin," Korov's voice said from somewhere above them. Jake's squad mates started moving, but their heavy equipment made them slow and clumsy. Vexstar S extra armor plates scraped against the rocks. Silenef energy shields flickered as they encountered the toxic gases. Grox's environmental suit made loud pumping sounds as it worked to keep him alive. Lyra's floating devices beat warnings about the dangerous conditions. Jake took a deep breath and started running. The hot air burned his lungs at first, but he had experienced worse during training in desert conditions back on Earth. The gravity was heavy, but not impossible. He had trained in weighted gear before. The rocky ground was uneven and sharp, but Jake's boots had good treads. He picked his way carefully but quickly through the dangerous terrain. Behind him, he could hear his squad mates struggling with their equipment. "Jake, wait!" Vexstar called out. "The toxic gases will kill you without a breathing apparatus." Jake paused and took another breath. The air was bad, but he had breathed. Worse air in industrial areas back home. His lungs burned, but they still worked. "I'm okay," he called back. He continued moving, finding handholds in the rock walls that his squad mates couldn't use because of their bulky gear. The heat was intense, but he had worked in foundries and engine rooms that were just as hot. He was soaked with sweat, but that was what sweating was for. Halfway through the course, Jake realized he was ahead of everyone else. The other students were struggling with equipment failures and mobility problems. Their protective gear was keeping them alive, but it was also slowing them down. Jake reached a section where steam vents shot burning gas into the air. He watched the pattern for a moment, then timed his movements to avoid the worst of it. His uniform got singed in a few places, but he made it through. Behind him, other students were having to wait for their equipment to analyze the gas composition before their suits would allow them to proceed. Jake was already moving on to the next obstacle. The final challenge was a cliff face that had to be climbed. Jake's squad mates arrived just as he was pulling himself over the top. They stared at him in amazement. "How are you still alive?" Silenef asked, her crystal body dim with exhaustion. "I'm tougher than I look," Jake said, breathing hard but grinning. "Impossible," Grox said, his environmental suit making angry beeping sounds. "The toxic level should have killed you 10 minutes ago. The heat should have cooked you," Vexstar added. "The gravity should have crushed you," Lyra said, her floating devices struggling to keep her upright. Jake looked around at his Squad mates. They were all alive, but barely. Their equipment had kept them safe, but it had also made the course much harder for them. Maybe humans are just different, Jake said. Different is an understatement, came Korath's voice. The instructor appeared, having watched the entire exercise. In 20 years of teaching, I have never seen a student complete the volcanic hellscape simulation without protective equipment. Did I do something wrong? Jake asked. Wrong? You set a new course record. You completed the simulation in 47 minutes. The previous record was 93 minutes. Jake's squad mates stared at him with expressions he couldn't read. He wasn't sure if they were impressed or terrified. How? Vexstar asked simply. I don't know, Jake said honestly. I just did what felt natural. What feels natural to you would kill most of us, Silenus said quietly. Perhaps, Korath said, we need to reconsider what we know about Death World species. As they left the simulation chamber, Jake heard whispers from other students. Word was already spreading about the human who had completed the impossible. Course without protection. Some of the whispers sounded amazed. Others sounded worried. Jake wasn't sure which reaction scared him more. Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and looked around at the strangest place he had ever seen. The Zephyrian Combat Academy stood before him like a massive metal fortress built into the side of a mountain. The sky above was purple instead of blue, and 2 moons hung in the distance like glowing eyes watching him. He was 22 years old and had served 3 years as a Marine on Earth before being selected for this exchange program. Out of millions of soldiers, only he had been chosen to represent humanity at the galaxy's most famous military school. The thought made his stomach twist with nerves. Other students walked past him, but none of them looked human. A tall creature, with blue skin and 4 arms, carried what looked like a small computer on each limb. Another student was completely covered in what appeared to be living metal that shifted and moved as he walked. Jake had seen pictures of alien species before, but seeing them in person was different, much different. You must be the human. Voice said behind him. Jake turned to see a creature that looked like a walking tree with eyes. Its voice came from somewhere in its trunk. I am Instructor Korath. Welcome to the Academy. Thank you, sir, Jake replied, standing straight like he had been taught in the Marines. Follow me. I will show you to your barracks and introduce you to your squad, Korath said, walking toward the main building. His wooden feet made soft tapping sounds on the metal floor. As they walked through the corridors, Jake noticed that everything was built much larger than human buildings. The ceilings were at least 15 feet high, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 people to walk through side by side. Students of various species moved through the halls, most of them wearing some kind of protective gear, even though they were just walking the class. The Academy trains warriors from 12 different species, Korath explained as they walked. Each species brings their own strengths and weaknesses. The goal is to learn from each other and become better fighters. What about humans? Jake asked, what are we supposed to bring? Korath stopped walking and turned to look at him. The tree-like creature's expression was hard to read, but Jake thought he saw something like curiosity in those strange eyes. That, Korath said slowly, is what we are here to find out. They reached a large room with several beds arranged in a circle. 4 other students were already there, and they all turned to stare at Jake when he entered. He had never felt so out of place in his life. Squad 7, Korath announced. Meet your new member, Jake Morrison from Earth. The first alien to approach was covered in what looked like natural armor plating. His skin was dark gray and appeared to be as hard as stone. He was about Jake's height, but twice as wide. I am Vextar of the Cruellian Empire, he said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. I have heard stories about your species. They say you come from a death world. A death world? Jake asked, confused. A planet so dangerous that most species could not survive there, explained another squad member. This one looked like she was made of living crystal. Light seemed to bounce around inside her transparent body as she spoke. I am Silenev. My people, the Vorthans, classify your Earth as a Class 9 death world. Only the most extreme planets rate higher. Jake frowned. Earth isn't that dangerous. Sure, we have some rough weather sometimes, but people live there just fine. The third squad member laughed, a sound like metal scraping against metal. He was huge, at least 8 feet tall, and covered in what looked like thick fur. My name is Grox. I am from Herca Prime, and even my people would need special equipment to survive on your world. Your planet has extreme temperatures, violent storms, dangerous radiation from your star, and gravity that would crush most species. Plus, earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and poisonous creatures, added the fourth member. She was small and delicate looking, with pale skin that seemed to glow slightly. I am Lyra of the Etherean Collective. My people have studied your world from a distance. We cannot understand how any species survived there long enough to develop. Intelligence. Jake looked around at his new squad mates and realized they were all staring at him like he was some kind of monster. I guess I never thought about it that way, he said. Earth is just home to me. That is exactly what makes your species so interesting, Kor said. What you consider normal would kill most of us. Now, let me explain how things work here. The instructor went on to describe the Academy's rules and schedule. Students would undergo various types of training, from basic combat to advanced tactics. They would face simulated battles in environments designed to test their limits. Most importantly, they would learn to work together as a team. Tomorrow you will begin your first combat exercise, Korith told them. Make sure you have all your protective equipment ready. The simulation chamber can be very dangerous without proper gear. After the instructor left, Jake's squad mates began pulling out their equipment. Vexstar opened a large metal case and started putting on additional armor plates over his already tough skin. Silenev activated several small devices that created a shimmering energy field around her crystal body. Grox put on what looked like a spacesuit designed for someone his size. Lyra surrounded herself with small floating objects that hummed with energy. Where is your equipment? Vexstar asked, looking at Jake's single small bag. This is it, Jake said, pointing to his standard military uniform and basic gear. That cannot be right, Silenev said, her crystal body flashing with what Jake assumed was concern. You will need environmental protection, medical monitoring systems, emergency life support, and enhanced armor at the very least. I've got body armor, Jake said, tapping his chest. And my uniform is designed to handle different temperatures and conditions. That is not nearly enough, Grox said, his voice full of worry. The combat simulations are designed to test us at our limits. Without proper equipment, you could be seriously injured or killed. My people have been fighting wars for thousands of years, Jake said, trying to sound confident. We've learned to adapt to whatever situation we face. But this is different, Lyra said, her glowing skin getting brighter. These simulations recreate the worst conditions from across the galaxy. Toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, crushing gravity, radiation that will cook most species alive. I appreciate the concern, Jake said, but I think I'll be okay. Humans are pretty tough. His squad mates exchanged glances that Jake couldn't interpret. You got the feeling they thought he was either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. That night, as Jake lay in his bed listening to the strange sounds his alien squad mates made while sleeping, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe he really was unprepared for what was coming. Maybe humans weren't as tough as he thought. But then he remembered his training on Earth. He had survived in deserts where the temperature reached 120 degrees. He had fought in mountains where the air was so thin that some people couldn't breathe. He had swum in oceans during storms that would terrify most people. If Earth really was as dangerous as his squad mates claimed, then maybe he was more prepared than anyone realized. Maybe being human was exactly the advantage he needed. Tomorrow, he will find out for sure.